And we're live. Welcome back, everyone. Odin here. Hope the audio is okay. I've been fighting some issues tech wise the last few weeks with, I'm not sure if it's a StreamYard issue, if it's my Mac issue, a Roadcaster issue, or a combination of all that. So I'm scrapping it, going back to simple stuff. I have a different wireless mic that isn't as good as my Rode mic, but it's better than the computer. So let me know in the comments not if you're not able to hear me okay. Hopefully, be okay. I'm also going to beta. I'm going to StreamYard as a beta testing so that any comments that come in can automatically feed on screen. So I'm going to turn that on. Behave yourselves, but anyone who comments will show up on the screen in the bottom right hand corner. So feel free to chime in and let us know what you think. And then I can kind of pay attention a little more to what I wanted to say. So, the title today, before I begin, no Midnight Philosopher today or next week. He had some other commitments, but I said, hey, I'm always good for a good solo. So, I'll go ahead and record something for you guys today. Tim Gordon, the infamous Timothy Gordon. We've talked about him in the past, generally in less than um, pleasant ways, I guess, less flattering. Uh, but Timothy Gordon helped my marriage recently, and I want to talk a little bit about that. And then I have some other thoughts I wanted to share about some recent conversations I've had with people about Humani Vitae, NFP, and specifically with what I see a growing movement of people who are taking the position that Humani Vitae and NFP ought to be ignored and are not licit. Like you can't even use NFP. You're either all on or you're completely abstinent. There is a growing trend of people who are adopting that approach, and I think they under identify the correct problem, if you will, but I think the solution they offer is wrong. So I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But I want to talk a little bit about Timothy Gordon. So I'm sure you all know who Timothy Gordon is. If not, um, I'll kind of give you a recap. So Timothy Gordon, I believe, is a convert. He's, I guess you would call him a kind of a red pill Catholic trad. Has a pretty popular YouTube channel, live streams a lot. He and his wife, I can't remember his wife's name off the top of my head. Um, as I understand it, Timothy Gordon kind of came up in the church around the same time as Taylor Marshall, and in fact, they used to have some sort of a show together, Timothy Gordon and Taylor Marshall. And I didn't really hear about these guys at that time, but people that I know have told me that their content was actually really good and edifying when they were sort of new converts. I don't know if they were apologists or anything, but certainly doing good things to promote Catholicism as a new convert. Good to see you, Midnight. So, but they apparently had some sort of a breakup, which, from what I can tell of Timothy Gordon and Taylor Marshall, that doesn't surprise me. Those are very large personalities that I could certainly see how conflict would arise, and there isn't room for both of them. Um, but so they apparently had some sort of a pretty bad separation, and I think that remains, as I understand it. Not they really haven't reconciled. If I'm wrong about that, please let me know. So Taylor Marshall has really gone. I mean, I guess they've both gone full trad. I would say Taylor Marshall strikes me as being much closer to the I would say set of a conscious, but he certainly seems um, sympathetic to the schismatic or SSPX. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Midnight. Um, I I used to. I mean, I think they're both probably well intended or were at some point in time, but now they are professional Catholics, if you will. They're professional online social media Catholics. I think they'll both admit that. They both, I think, make a living on this stuff. They sell stuff, they have courses, books, all that kind of stuff. And I'm not here to say that there's anything wrong with that, but I think there's definitely a hazard to be had when your livelihood involves it depends on you creating enough sensational Catholic content, if you will. So that's one of the reasons why, at least on my end, not only is my content not popular enough that anyone would dare pay for it, I really have always had the position I have no interest in monetizing any of this stuff because I don't want what I think and say to be in any way influenced by financial considerations or even legitimate financial considerations trying to provide for your family, which I think both those guys do. They both have large families. um, Timothy Gore, I mean, from what I can tell, Taylor Marshall really focuses a great deal on liturgy and kind of church politics, and Tim Gordon does to some extent too. But Timothy Gordon seems to have developed this shtick around kind of patriarchy and marriage and sort of the traditional model of marriage, and more precisely, the idea that wives must submit to their husbands in sort of the most conservative traditional way, and they do shows together on that, and they've had Father Chad Ripperger on to talk about the dangers of feminism and all this kind of stuff. And I don't think that Timothy Gordon is against Humani Vitae per se, but I think he would certainly fit in, or natural family planning per se, but I think he would certainly fit into the category of people who are very, very skeptical of it and hesitant about it, and that's kind of where they have their worlds kind of overlap with Father Chad Ripperger. So, but one of the things that struck me about Timothy Gordon, I've only really seen his stuff in the last year or so, is just kind of how off-putting and abrasive he is. And I don't know if he's always been that way, if he's gotten more so over time, but he's not someone I really would like look up to, even if I agreed with his stuff. And I think probably his personality makes it even more difficult for me to take seriously what he has to say. But recently, I don't know how long ago, but I think it was in the last few weeks, maybe a month or so, Timothy Gordon and his wife were doing a response episode to something put on by, it wasn't Catholic Answers, I think it was Essentia Press or whatever, the one that Father Mike Schmitz is part of. And they were answering some question and answer form. This is Ascension Press, about marriage and NFP, and I thought they did a fine job. I had not seen the original videos until I listened to Timothy Gordon's, and Timothy Gordon and his wife reacted to it. And in fairness to Timothy Gordon, if you will, he acknowledged where he agreed with them, but there wasn't much that they agreed with, specifically as to the issue of mutual submission. This seems to be the one thing that they really have a hard time with, this idea of mutual submission when it comes to the marital act, the marital debt, things like that. He certainly fits into the category of people who sees that as a notion of feminism, modernism, and this is where they really seem like kind of like biblical literalists. What's the fundamentalist? Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. And there's a couple scriptural passages where talk about wives submitting to their husbands, and the marital debt and all that. They take that very, very seriously. Um, um, and that's kind of their whole shtick, right? Is this um, the marital debt? They take it very seriously, and that the wife must submit to her husband, except in things like sin. Like he can't tell her to do something that is sinful or engage in heresy, but everything short of that, they say that's how God designed it. And I don't know. I think it's a troublesome thing for Christians, for Catholics, and I don't necessarily take issue with Timothy Gordon's kind of literalist application of that, but it certainly seems like something that's been abused in the past. And the idea of mutual submission that kind of came out, mutual submission that came out of theology, the body, and stuff like that, I can't see it as anything but a positive development in understanding of the person and marriage, and just in practical terms seems like a much better way to live your life. um, and but they were really having it with this mutual submission thing. But what was most notable about it, and I'll try to remember to add a link to the Timothy Gordon video in the description when I'm done. You should go check it out for yourself. Um, but so last week, I was traveling out of state with my wife, and I wanted to get her reaction to it, and I kind of knew what the reaction would be, but I put in the Timothy Gordon video, and it's hard to describe how offensive and uncharitable he is. Like just the snickering and the name calling and like the slurs they use is just so juvenile and again off-putting. Because well, I don't necessarily disagree with Timothy Gordon entirely, and there's probably a fair amount of stuff that I agree with him about, but I just the message and the delivery is so, I don't know, unlike what I would expect out of a good and virtuous person, that it just it just makes it impossible to take anything they say seriously. And I think it severely undercuts the legitimacy of their message, because I would never want to talk to other people, even those that I disagree with, the way that he does and the way that she does. But he's kind of more of an offender. And it was exactly my wife's reaction. Um, so we both had this shared kind of revulsion for what he was saying and how he was saying it. Um, but then what was nice, because we had 3 hours in the car each way, we got talking about it and really started talking about our own marriage and uh, how it's sort of developed over time. And there's been seasons. And, um, one of the things I think we both agreed was we really feel like our marriage has never been better than it is right now. Like it is, I guess, fun. I mean, it is so fun right now to be married, even though it's not all fun and games, and NFP is still kind of a drag. Um, our marriage has never been as um, fruitful and joy bringing as it is right now, and we were trying to reflect on why is that. Because um, because with NFP, I mean, our intimate life is much less frequent than it has been in the past when we were younger, but I think the quality is so much better. And the biggest thing that we realize is this is really the first time since we got married over 20 some years ago that we didn't have a baby, or my wife wasn't pregnant. And my wife, in a special way, was like, I can't believe how much motherhood, especially that new motherhood, that pregnancy, life, nursing, how much of a toll that took on her and in turn put on our marriage. And it's very true. And, you know, for so long we were just trying to get by and she was just trying to survive, and time with me just became another chore, another thing that she just didn't have the time, energy, or interest in for the most part. Now we're not really in that situation, and we've really been able to devote time and attention to each other, and just spending time with each other and listening to each other and talking. We've talked more just about things, about life in the last 6 months or a year than we probably did the prior 20 years combined. It's been that amazing, and in no small part because we are kind of moving out of that season of having babies or being pregnant. Our youngest is almost 3. She's still a handful, but a 3-year-old is different than a newborn, right? Or being pregnant and having a 1-year-old or whatever. I mean, that's really challenging. Um, so we've really been enjoying and, you know, just enjoying each other again, in a way that honestly I don't think we've experienced since our honeymoon, since we were newly married. Um, but talking, listening to Timothy Gordon and just having this shared reaction to what he was saying, you know, really gave us an opportunity to talk about some things in our own marriage, in our own life, what we want, what's important that maybe we wouldn't have had before. And so I guess I got to give credit to Timothy Gordon for giving us an opportunity to grow in our marriage at his expense. Um, so that was kind of what I wanted to say about that. And I will say this. I think we talked about this in last week's live stream that, um, and for anyone that knows me um, in real life, if you do keep this information confidential, but our oldest son got married or is getting married, and in fact is civilly married, but the church wedding isn't going to be until later this year because of his situation with the military. They needed to do that so they could get housing and stuff lined up. But we went out, and you know, it was really really fun to spend time with my son and his new bride or fiance as they get ready for this stage of their life. A little younger than my wife and I, but not a ton younger. And it was really fun and refreshing to see um, them at that stage of their life where they're in love and they enjoy spending time with each other. Um, and so it was a lot of fun, and it was just the whole weekend, the whole trip was a great time, and my wife and I had a really really good time. Um, and But now we're back to taking care of kids and all that. But we really enjoyed ourselves, and I'm really excited for my son and his future bride as they begin. He found a really really nice young woman, Hispanic. We went to Spanish mass, and that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that this weekend. Um, One of the other things that I wanted to talk about, just because it was on my mind, and is there is this growing trend of people, trads, who are, um, I guess the way I would say is they're re-looking or questioning Humani Vitae and the church's sort of teaching on natural family planning and things like that, theology of the body since, say the 1950s, 1960s. And um, there is a growing trend of people who are looking at Humani Vitae and to some, into natural family planning and seeing conflicts or tensions between that and how the church traditionally had talked about this, and as recently as Casti Connubii in I think the late 1930s. Um, and what I find interesting is how will they will see those conflicts and come to the conclusion that Humani Vitae has to be the one that's wrong. It can't be what came before it, right? Um, which is so remarkable for a few reasons. Number one, it's remarkable to me at all than anyone using their own mind, not just taking someone else's word for it, but reasoning yourself could possibly conclude that there's anything wrong with natural family planning if it's done mutually, if the decision is mutual, and let's say let's just assume there's some sort of a reasonable reason to avoid pregnancy. How anyone would come to the conclusion that that's offensive to God somehow is just remarkable to me. Um, but there is, and that's the conclusion they reach. Not, I don't think, because they see those things as offensive, but they see those things as in conflict with older teachings, and so it's the older rule, the older teaching that's given preference, not because it has more merit, but because it's just been around longer. And what's noteworthy is how they never question whether Casti Connubii is correct or the prior ones. They never question whether the historical opposition to contraception is well founded. That's just assumed. I mean, it's it's just assumed that that's correct, and maybe it is. I'm not here to say it's not, but you have this conflict which they recognize between Humani Vitae and, let's say, Casti Connubii, and rather than weighing them on their own merits, they simply say, well, Casti Connubii is older. Must that's the one we're going to go with. Because I agree with them to some extent that the idea that you can use natural family planning, or even to some extent that you can licitly engage in the marital act during pregnancy when procreation is literally impossible, or after menopause when procreation is literally impossible. Um, Now there are some, and I give credit to our good friend John Farrell, who has, I think, from what I can tell, more or less adopted the position that it's sinful to do that, or at least venially sinful. And I think I mean, I think if you're going to do a true serious application of Casti Connubii and all that, I think that is a more logical extension of the rule to say, um, if procreation is not possible, you shouldn't be engaging in the marital act at all unless you're trying to. Well, you shouldn't, because you can't get pregnant. Therefore, you can't fulfill the purpose of it. I think, to his credit, to their credit, that is a more honest application of the rules to say, if you can't use contraception, you also, and I guess to some extent, can't use NFP, you also shouldn't be engaging in the marital act during pregnancy or after menopause. Now, I think I think the vast majority of traditionalists don't go that far and are okay with marital intimacy during pregnancy, after menopause, et cetera. Because I mean, obviously, people want and need to be able to do that, right? But I think I think this is probably the major problem with the traditional approach is, if they if they don't allow contraception and if they don't allow NFP, but yet they allow intimacy during pregnancy or after menopause, how do you resolve that conflict? I don't think you can. I had someone recently over on Twitter argue, because I asked the question. I said, "Well, is it wrong to use, let's say, a condom during pregnancy?" Now they all say, "Well, why would you ever do that?" Well, there are actually some situations where a couple might either want to do that or be advised to do that. But let's say a condom during pregnancy, um, and he said, "Well, yeah, that's wrong too." I said, "Well, how? How can it be?" And he acknowledged that it's not contraceptive because it's not preventing conception, because conception literally can't take place. Conception was never going to take place as long as you're pregnant, with or without a condom. But he claimed that, and this is where they kind of bring in some of the modern theology of the body stuff, is where he said, well, it violates the unitive end of the act. I'm like, how does that happen? And apparently they contend that without skin to skin contact, you haven't fulfilled the unitive um, object of the act, which I think that's a real stretch. And I asked him, I says, where does the church define unity as you're using it there? And he didn't point me to anything. He said, go look in theology of the body. I don't think it's there. If anyone in the comments is aware of a place where the church has actually tried to define the unitive aspect of the marital act, I would like to see it, because it's really not there. I don't think it's in the catechism or all. I've looked for it. Um, I mean, I think, to me, the simplistic thing is the actual physical act of intercourse itself. Um, that makes sense to me. Although those who argue against, let's say, other acts and things like that, will sometimes try to extend that beyond that. But I mean, that seems to me the most simplistic and logical thing, is just simply the physical act of intercourse itself. Um, but he tried to argue that having a condom on, even if the couple like fully consents to it, and it gives you, I don't have any personal experience with it, but let's say it gives you 90% of the experience or feeling. I don't know. I mean, this is where it's so weird for especially for non-married people to tell married people what they're supposed to expect out of their marriage, and you're not enjoying unity. Well, I think you ask the couple, they feel like they're pretty unitive, and they would take that if that was available to them. Yeah, I mean, this I think it's important that the church actually define these terms, because I don't think it does. I mean, I think I get what you're saying, Midnight, but I don't think that's actually. I think a fair reading of the church documents that talk about this are more narrow than that, and I think are much more just simply the physical act of intercourse. I could be wrong, because, like I said, it's not like it's been defined from what I can tell. But I think if we're talking about the church documents that really serve as the basis for these discussions, I think it seems to be a much more narrow definition. But I think it's something that we ought to maybe think about more clearly defining, because it can become important in these kinds of discussions. But I think there is, in the same way that these folks will say that there's a conflict between Casti Connubii and the church's posture on contraception prior to Humanae Vitae. There's a conflict between that and Humanae Vitae and the allowance of natural family planning. I acknowledge that tension exists. Um, but I think there's an even more significant tension or conflict that they themselves hold that they don't acknowledge. That being, how could it be possible for contraception, other acts, NFP to be wrong? Because it's all based on procreation. I mean, that's sort of John Farrell's whole stick. The purpose of the sexual act is to procreate, and that's certainly, I think that's consistent with the traditional um, authorities, writings, things like that on the subject. Is it's always about not allowing people to enjoy the pleasure and enjoyment and unity, if you will, of sex without the risk or chance of pregnancy. I mean, pregnancy has always been the governor. Um, it's it's pretty apparent to me that one of the reasons why they liked the procreative responsibility is it's a natural born um, discouragement of having um, too much sex for fun and pleasure, because if you do that, if you end up with a bunch of kids out of it, that's sort of the price you pay to play. I mean, I think they don't say it that way, but it seems to me that it really is kind of you pay to play. If you want to play, here's what you're going to have to pay for it. But I think there is a real conflict that they cannot identify how it can be okay, and I think they recognize that it's okay because, again, this is where common sense just becomes too overwhelming for people. Um, Obviously, people enjoy and get benefit. Marriages benefit from being able to engage in sexual intimacy even when procreation is not possible because you're pregnant or because you're over past menopause. People's sex drives continue during those times and after menopause. Um, and I, I don't know how you explain that away or explain the fact that people have this natural desire for each other and this natural enjoyment for it, even when procreation is not possible. How you um, reconcile that with um, the complete ban on pro, contraception, etc. Oh yeah, good old Jonah 2.0. And I mean, just use your brain for a second. Like no one would come up with the idea that it's wrong um that it's wrong to have sex during pregnancy or after menopause unless someone told you that's the way it was. I mean, it defies your natural inclinations and common sense to come to that conclusion. The only way you could come to that conclusion is because you have been told, rightly or wrongly, that these are the rules. This is what God wants for us, despite our own experience, despite our own reason, despite our own natural inclination. And then we just chalk it up to concupiscence or the fall. I mean, that's always the catch all. That covers a multitude of sins, if you will. It's just um, you know, that's how you get out. And maybe it is, but no one really knows. No one knows what it was like before the fall. All we have is the imaginations and speculation of people throughout history, and I'll just note that some of those people were pretty um, disturbed and malaligned in their lives, or at least had past lives like that. Um, Albert the Great on Sunday, he said, "Pleasure and spirituality don't coexist in time." like one or the other at any given time. Why? Like, why is that? Why are those mutually exclusive? Why are they why are they so suspicious and fearful of pleasure? I get it. I mean, pleasure is the reason why most of us are fat and slothful. Um, but why did God make things pleasurable? Is that all original sin too? Is that all concupiscence? Were we all just living on tasteless, stale bread until the fall, and then we decided needed salt and syrup with our food? I mean, I I, I just don't understand why that has to be, and why we just assume that that's the way it is. Like, why do we just sort of accept that without questioning when it's not like Albert the Great had any greater insight in life than the rest of us? Maybe he was more virtuous. I don't know. But we all have brains, we all have experiences, unless he was some mystic. And even then, none of us really knows whether someone's mystical experiences of God or some other origins. I know on Twitter, someone was citing Midnight might remember this. Was it Catherine of Siena? I think it was. Was talking. Is it? It's attributed to her that our Lord told her through some sort of mystical experience that the demons are so offended by acts of sodomy that they can't even bear to watch it themselves. And I'm just like, I mean, I get like saying that stuff is wrong, but I really am skeptical that that stuff is so distasteful to the demons themselves that they couldn't look at it. I mean, maybe but it's interesting how those mystical visions seem to perfectly line up with the predominant cultural spiritual views of the times. I mean, it's not like that would have been there would have been anything particularly controversial about that back then, even now, but certainly back then, I mean, it was just kind of well assumed that, sodomy, those kinds of acts were immoral. So it, when the alleged mystical experience sort of reinforces what everyone already believes, I don't know what that, I don't know what that, where that gets us, um, but so I don't know what we're supposed to do with that stuff because again, I I'm not I don't know enough about her experience or Albert the Great's experience or whatever to know whether they should be taken seriously or not. But I do have my own experience. I do have my life experience, and I'm a reasonably intelligent person. Um, and I'm pretty open to new information and to hear arguments and discussion and stuff. And some of these things are just so far removed from what I would naturally conclude if left to my own. Like, just sit down and study the data, study my experience, listen to other people, listen to people who seem credible and honest and genuine to me. I would never come to these conclusions. The only reason that I even entertain the possibility that they're right is because someone from a long time ago told me they are, and I might go to hell if I don't believe it. I mean, um, that's the challenge of being a Catholic is we're often told to accept things really without any questioning at all because that's the ultimate threat. If you don't, if you disregard this, you do so at your peril and perhaps your eternal peril. And that just gets thrown around so much that at some point it starts to, I think, lose its effectiveness. It's kind of like reminds me of my wife. I love my wife, but she will threaten to take away all the things that my kids care about on a pretty regular basis, that I don't think they really take her seriously at this point in time. Um, yeah, you'll have to go back and read the beginning. I didn't say he saved my marriage. I said he helped my marriage. So I want to give the guy too much credit, but you'll have to go back and read it. Um, yeah, and I don't mean to be what do I say, uncharitably dismissive of them. I'm not, but I think there is a strong tendency to be overly deferential to people and overly dismissive of our own feelings and experiences and knowledge because someone with a saint at the beginning of their name said otherwise, right? And I think it's important to note, it's not like they're infallible. It's not like they were perfect and that everything they ever said or did was correct. And I think in many ways the standard is there any error here? Like it's not can we has the church stated what they said is definitely true. It's usually is there anything here that's clearly erroneous? And if it's clearly erroneous, then they, you know, con- condemn it or whatever. But I think not being clearly erroneous is not the same thing as being clearly correct. And I think that's something that I don't know, we ought to think about more is how much deference are we called to give to people who lived in the past who were no doubt well intended themselves, but were human and limited just like the rest of us, but probably more limited than the rest of us because we all have more information, more access to things. We have generally better nutrition, better education as when we're younger. I would think most people in today's society are just as a whole more educated, more able to reason than those in the past. I don't know how that can't be the case. Um, so that's what I really struggle with when someone says, "Well, this is what Saint Alphonsus Liguori said," or whatever. And just full disclosure, I mean, I was once I loved Saint Alphonsus Liguori, and I still love him as a saint, but I really don't find much of what he said to be super helpful. But he was my confirmation patron. I have I, when I was a teenager, I bought a bunch of his books with my own money, and I read them all of the four last things and all that. And I can't say that it didn't help me at that time, but he's pretty over the top, and things that he says about marriage, or at least I understand he says about marriage, I just think would be clearly damaging to my marriage, or following his advice, I believe strongly would be damaging to my marriage and damaging to my role as a father. I sincerely and firmly believe that. Yeah, I did. I read all of it. I used to pray multiple rosaries a day. I used to walk through the cemetery. So I was a teenager. I used to walk through the cemetery, praying the rosary, praying the chaplet of divine mercy, praying for the souls. I'd put rocks under in my shoes, the little pennants. I mean, I was pretty hardcore, and I just as I've gotten older and as I've just seen more of life and I've experienced more of life. I find a lot of that stuff to be less and less helpful, for better or for worse. So yeah. Well, I'm glad we agree there. I mean, I again, I don't even like to pick on Timothy Gordon. I guess I wouldn't call him that. He sure acts like one. I would be very embarrassed if so, you know, anyone thought I acted like Timothy Gordon, like I would legitimately be embarrassed and kind of mortified by that. Um, so, but I don't know. Am I just too confident in my own beliefs? Am I proud and arrogant? All that's possible. I totally, I totally accept the fact that that's possible, or that my sins, past or ongoing, um, color my intellect. I'm totally open to that possibility. But at the end of the day, what am I supposed to do? Like, just pretend that I don't think these things, that I don't firmly believe these things? I just think I don't think humans can thrive or survive in in a state of intellectual paradox. Like, I don't think we can reasonably um, operate where we say we believe things that we truly in our hearts don't believe or can't believe or not able to believe right now. And that's something that as a teenager I never could have fathomed. Like, to me it was just like, and I was probably a lot like um Jonah 2.0. I would have been like, well, of course you bend your, or you adjust your outlook on life to whatever the church says or whatever the church father said. Um, I I no longer think that that's actually possible, at least not all the time. But maybe this is a season of life, and maybe I'll come around to that. But right now, I cannot say with confidence that's the right way to to live. I mean, yeah, I mean, this is where I think, obedience to your conscience is actually what we're supposed to do. I think that of anything is the most Catholic thing to do, is to follow your well-formed conscience. Um, for the very reason I just got done saying, is that I don't think man or women, but man in the general terms, I don't think man is able to live in a state of intellectual paradox where you claim to believe something that you just genuinely and sincerely do not believe. And I think a lot of people have been pressured and forced and threatened to take that position, and understandably they break, they rebel. And for a lot of those people, I think they become either atheists or agnostics. And I understand how that happened, because I don't think they could live with the intellectual paradox that they were told they had to live with. And rather than finding a way to um, allow them to coexist, they are more or less forced out. I mean, I think that's probably my biggest criticism or concern about the rise of traditionalism, is how it is very much an exclusionary approach. You need to be with us 100% of the way. If you're 90%, 99% with us, but 1% off, you're out. Get out. You're not Catholic anymore. Go join some other church. And I just think that is completely unnecessary. And I don't think that's actually a, 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 an actual Catholic approach. Um, so a conscience could allow something illicit, but I don't see how it could make you think you should do something against church teaching. Um, Maybe. I mean, again, I will use the example that I firmly believe that there are people, there are marriages maybe myself included in some respect, where doing what the church says would be harmful to my marriage or harmful to my children. Um, I sincerely believe that. I'm not exaggerating. Like I think so. I think in that respect, I think your conscience could could compel you to do something that the church says you shouldn't do, or avoid doing something the church says you have to do, because if it would legitimately harm your marriage or harm your ability to raise your children well, I don't know what you're supposed to do in that situation. I mean, I have my own personal opinion, but I'll kind of keep it to myself. But um, that's not the one I meant to put on there. But okay, I think you're well, maybe I'll just keep my own opinions to myself on that. This is the one I was trying to put up. Pickett says, plenty of examples of conscience telling you something is the right thing to do, not just okay to do. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good observation. Not whether something is just permissible or tolerable, but may actually be the right thing to do. Not something you're allowed to do, but something you ought to do. I mean, I do think that I I I legitimately believe there are circumstances where good, well-intentioned Catholic people could find themselves in a situation where the right thing for them to do would be to do something the church says not to do, or to omit something the church says that they ought to do. Now, what they're supposed to do in that situation is above my pay grade. I'm not a moral theologian, and perhaps that is part of the cross. Perhaps the cross includes doing something that is in fact not just difficult, but actually harmful to your marriage, actually harmful to your children. I mean, maybe that is m- maybe those aren't inconsistent with each other, but it's really hard for me, you know, as a dad of 9, to get fully on board with that. That's kind of where my brain really starts to put up the alarm bells. Um, and I understand why people. I never understand how someone could get to that point until I, just live long enough. Um, yeah, I mean, again, I think the traditional approach, and I would say let's just in a charitable way refer to that as the scrupulous approach. That is what they would say is, well, do, don't go to communion. But it still comes back to the issue of, are you sinning? And if you are following your conscience, I mean, if we do believe what the church actually says about conscience, and you follow your conscience, I don't understand how we would tell that person, oh, by the way, don't go to communion. Because why would we tell them that unless we're saying you're still in a state of mortal sin? Like, what would be the reason for not going to communion, or telling someone not to go to communion, unless they're in a state of mortal sin? And in which case, we don't actually believe what we claim to say about conscience. And this is where you put people in an impossible situation, because they sincerely and I mean, they just sincerely believe what their conscience informs them of, And so they either miss out on the graces of the sacrament, even when they wouldn't or shouldn't be doing, shouldn't need to do that, or they go to confession to confess something they don't actually have sorrow for. Like, right? What are you supposed to do in that situation? I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that, other than I don't know that it's as cut and dried as Jonah 2.0 would suggest that it is. um yeah, this is something that I was certainly with you guys for a long time. Certainly when I was a teenager, I would have always erred on the side of not receiving communion. But I think by doing that, it reflects. I mean, I think it reflects in some ways a rejection of what the church actually says about conscience and contrition, and what does and doesn't constitute sin, and not just that it's a serious matter, but that there is full knowledge and full consent. Um, I mean, I I think we should we should be serious about all the stuff we claim to believe, not just some of the stuff, right? I mean, I think I would challenge the traditionalist to, put your money where your mouth is. If the church says what it says about conscience, if you believe it, believe it. Like, let's um so I agree. I mean, I it's really, for me personally, it's difficult to reconcile our Catholic understanding of God, who is, I guess, above all things, loving and merciful and whatever, with this, you know, this other view of God, which seems to be like God is very much just kind of sitting, waiting, and relishing in our failure. I mean, that it's hard not to see that in that approach. Um, yeah, and that's exactly right. And this is where, and I've said this before, and I want to say it again, um, because people will say, well, you wouldn't disregard what the church says about the Trinity or whatever, or Marian dogma, and this is there is, I think, a fundamental difference between um, sort of deferring to what the church says about things that are, number one, absolutely within the purview of, let's say, theologians, like the nature of God, the nature of our Lord, Mary's nature. I mean, that seems to me right in their wheelhouse. So number one, it's exactly what I would expect the church and theologians to be focused on. And number two, and on a much more pragmatic level, none of that really impacts our lives one way or another. Now, maybe it impacts our concept of God, and with Mary, maybe it impacts whether we have a devotion to Mary, whether we pray the rosary and things like that. In case anyone wonders, I pray the rosary every day. I mean, occasionally I miss it, but I mean, I've prayed the rosary daily since into my early teens. Um, I used to really, really love the rosary. Now I would say I like the rosary, um, but you know those things, just it truly doesn't matter to me one way or another, whether uh, whether Mary was always a virgin, whether she was assumed into heaven, whether she's the mother of God, or whatever. I mean, all these things that led to schisms in the church and heresies. To me, I'd be fine either way, right? Like, it wouldn't affect how I go about my day-to-day living, how I raise my children, how I love my wife, all that kind of stuff. But these things impact that stuff directly, significantly, and probably daily, right? And that's where I think this is something, and kind of getting back to what I was saying before, this is, I would say, is far beyond the purview of what a celibate theologian should be well equipped to answer as anything, right? So you have that lack of actual experience coupled with the very real significant daily consequences of these things. And that's why that's why, these podcasts exist. This is why so many Catholics struggle with these things. It's not that they don't want to believe, or they are selfish, or just refuse um, to bend to what the church says, but they truly, genuinely find accepting 100% everything the church seems to say about these things is either not possible, or would be damaging to the relationship, damaging to the marriage in some respects, right? And so that is why this stuff is so important, and why I think it's critical that we continue to be talking about these things and wrestling with these things, and not simply saying, well, this is the way it's always been. Who am I to question? I don't think in this area especially that is the right approach, right? I don't. That's my own personal feeling about it. I just don't think. Um, well, I guess it's subjective. So Jonas says lived experience is pretty subjective and always heavily biased. Yeah. I mean, biased in what way? I mean, I guess it is subjective in that, it is not something that can be examined with a microscope or analyzed in mathematical terms. But we're being honest. What's the quote unquote proper end of this body part of this act is pretty subjective. It's not like we came with a parts manual. Um, and I would say those are extremely biased because of the sort of organic way that they arose over time, and were based on, at least in part, influenced by taboos and things like that we more or less don't really take seriously anymore. So I would say that is far more that criticism is far more appropriate for some of these long-standing norms or rules about you know sexual intimacy than, let's say, people's lived experience. And the other thing I would say is this: I mean, it's not as if what I'm talking about is unique. I mean, it's almost universal. I mean, even amongst those who claim to, believe that these things are immoral, whatever. I mean, it came up, just recently. I think it was Father Rippinger was said that the problem of porn and masturbation is as bad, or maybe even worse, in the traditional circles as it is in the Novus Ordo. And I know that raised a lot of controversy, and people were saying that um, traditionalists are probably more likely to confess it and whatever. And that's probably all true. But I mean, the quote unquote sexual urges and things like that are almost universal. Like in complete um, inverse inverse to what the traditional rules and expectations are. So I don't know that you could really just say that's dismiss it as being subjective lived experience when pretty much everyone, almost everyone, especially if people were asked to answer questions without any preconceived programming, I think the vast majority of people would find themselves on this kind of contrary to the traditional views about things. So at least that's my own personal experience. I don't know, but strongly suspect that is true. Functionally primary or imaginary in the sense of capture. Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, like it or not, most of what we believe as Catholics is stuff that we can't necessarily back up or support by our own physical bodies and observations and things like that. I mean, what God gave us typically doesn't allow us to see or validate that God exists, who God is, who Mary was. I mean, most all of it is unverifiable with the basic senses and tools that God gave us. Now, it'd be one thing if God just literally revealed himself um, to every single one of us in the same way that the Lord did to Moses and the prophets or whatever. And like if God literally spoke to every one of us, and some of us accept it and some of us reject it, that'd be one thing. If everyone is given them sort of the same access to the same information, and some take it and some don't, fine. But it's not really how it is. Like it's a kind of an uneven playing field, if you will, and so probably gonna have to wrap this up here in a couple minutes and go home and feed my family. Um, but uh, I'm not gonna get into the trans and gender fluid stuff, um, other than to say that um, you know I think that I think there is some truth to the fact that some of these things that were, let's say, culturally unheard of a couple generations ago, um, are strangely much more common than they used to be, and may be promoted or inflated through cultural reasons. But I think the opposite is also true, that you have to acknowledge is that as long as these things were not only culturally not accepted but rejected, and could be potentially dangerous for people to identify with these things, I think you have to understand why people would just keep their mouths shut and not come out and identify with some of these things. So I think you have to I think there's plenty of reasons why we have to be skeptical of comparing current data, current observations with how things were in the past, because we're really comparing apples and oranges. Yeah, that's the problem. That's a problem that um, just kind of gets, I think, gets ignored. But it's true that um, these teachings, some of these teachings, these concepts developed or were supported at one point in time by arguments that we now know with very little debate were not true or not accurate, right? And it's a possible you could come to the right result for the wrong reasons or with faulty information. I mean, if I'm given a complex math question and I don't know how to solve it. There's a chance that if I just fill in numbers, I get the correct answer, right? Like that's a possibility. Or I know enough to kind of like make a decent guess, but I could have gotten it completely wrong. Um, the reality is, if the information you're using to form a conclusion is faulty, there's just a high chance that your conclusion is faulty. Like I don't know how that could really be controversial. Just kind of following some of the comments here. Um, I I I think that I think we do a disservice to ourselves and we hurt our credibility when we're not willing to just concede points that we really have to concede, and where we hold on to too long to ideas or concepts that have been pretty clearly shown to be either inaccurate or only partially true. I mean, the church is a very, very slow moving vehicle. I get that. And there is a benefit to that, but there is also a real hazard to that is the church does not necessarily keep up at the pace of, say, the knowledge base that we have available to us, and seems to hold on to things for no other reason than this is what we've previously believed, and we're concerned about the implications of changing or looking like we were wrong in the past. I mean, that is, um, well, yeah. I mean, if your if your goal is to never have to say you made a mistake, well, then yeah, then never say you made a mistake. But I mean, there is practical consequences, but it's this idea that it's better to be consistent than to be right, and I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Maybe in the short term, but I think in the long term, you can only be wrong so many times before people just stop taking you seriously at all. I mean, I think that's something that we as Catholics need to be. I think we just need to grapple with a little bit. Um, at a bare minimum, take that into account when we are trying to engage in things like politics or apologetics, where we're trying to persuade people to come around to our way of thinking. I mean, I think we need to be fully honest with ourselves about how implausible and how unpersuasive a lot of this stuff is to people that don't already believe it. And maybe that just means we adjust our tactics. But I'm of the mindset that being sincere, being humble, and acknowledging where we've gotten things wrong in the past is the best approach. Like I think that's something that we ought to embrace a little more seriously as Catholics if we want to remain a force, if we want to be taken seriously, if we want to be legitimized. I think we have to be a little more self-reflective and acknowledge when we've um, kind of come late to the party a little bit. I just think that's something that personally I think that is something that we might benefit from as a church, because it's true that I that there's a lot of people out there that feel uh are lost, are looking for something. How many times do I see people who are either were Protestants or not, or non-Christian at all, and had kind of no direction, no principles in their life, and then were like came to the church and like, wow, this is what we've been looking for, that structure, those unchanging principles. And then at some point in time they get into the minutia of the sex stuff and they're like, well, this is absurd. And they don't join. It's the same story all the time. People don't get hung up. Converts don't really get hung up, I don't think, on the, let's say, the topic of Mary. They really don't. But they do get hung up on this stuff, rightly or wrongly. This is sort of the red line. This is the line in the sand where they're like, you're really asking me to turn my brain off for this one. And the reasons that you're giving, the stuff that was contained in the writings of Augustine and even in St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Alphonsus the Liguori, just isn't doing it for me. I just think that's a common scenario. And if we want to be honest with ourselves, we have to acknowledge that it's happening, and take that to heart. Think about that seriously. Um, okay, I have to go. I have to get stop at the grocery store quickly and head home. And but this has been fun. I really, really appreciate everyone who showed up in the comments. We had some really good engagement here. I should be back next week. If there's anything you guys would like to talk about, or things that you think I'm wrong about, or whatever, I'm always happy to have those discussions, and give you my input for what it's worth. Um, I'll certainly do an episode on it, and if anyone would like to join me in a live stream, um, let me know so we can cover it. So appreciate everyone who showed up. Leave a comment after the fact if you catch the live stream after the fact, and I'll do my best to respond. But otherwise, until next time, everyone, have a good one.